Tonight, I'm happy to introduce our guest speaker and fellow club member, Greg Brown. Greg is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Motorola Solutions, Inc. He became CEO of Motorola in January 2008 and led the successful spin-off of the consumer-focused Motorola Mobility in 2011. Greg serves as Deputy Chair of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. He is a member of the Executive Committee of the Business Roundtable and also chairs the Business Roundtable Immigration Committee. In addition to Greg's accomplishments as a business leader, he is also a distinguished civic leader in Chicago, serving on the boards of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the Big Shoulders Fund, the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club of Chicago, World Business Chicago, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and last but not least, the Economic Club of Chicago. Greg maintains strong bonds with his alma mater, Rutgers University, where he serves as chair of the Board of Governors. My first question for Greg tonight is going to be, given all these activities, how do you find time to be CEO of Motorola Solutions? Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Greg Brown.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you to the Economic Club for giving me the honor of speaking to this illustrious group tonight. It's great to see many friends and colleagues and leaders in the audience whom I respect and hold in very high regard. I'd also like to thank the people of Motorola Solutions who are here tonight, and especially my wife, Anna, and my daughter, Megan, who, by the way, just told us that a second grandchild will become a part of our family in a few months. It's a little boy named Parker who will join his big sister Molly, who celebrates her one-year-old birthday on Saturday. And Megan, I couldn't be more proud. There is no doubt that I have the best job in the world. This is my 7th year as CEO of Motorola Solutions, and the road traveled has been significant and transformational for me both professionally and personally. For the next few minutes, I'd like to talk with you about the journey of transforming a complex 86-year-old multi-industry company into one that's singularly focused on its core business. An endeavor that is still very much a work in progress, by the way, and I'd like to share 5 lessons that I've learned along the way. But first, a little background. Now, many of you here tonight probably know that Motorola from cell phones, something that has now become seemingly an indispensable part of our lives. If you go back a little even further, the company used to be 150,000 employees, 6 divisions. This is just in the year 2000. It was a sprawling conglomerate where revenue peaked at about $40 billion in 2005, benefited by the frenzy and popularity of the Razor, which I'm sure you remember well. The company was known for invention and started many critical technologies that are ubiquitous to life today. Along the way, we invented parts of the television industry, cellular technology, and of course the cell phone, as well as the car radio, by the way, in the 1930s, which you may or may not know is where the name Motorola came from. Motor vehicle, Victrola, Motorola, with the invention of the car radio in the 30s. Over the past 9 decades, our company has changed in size and shape and focus, but Chicago has always been our home. And the values of this great city have influenced the values of our firm. When the sale of our enterprise business to Zebra Technologies is complete later this year, our business will be solely focused on providing, as you saw and in part, mission-critical communications for 50,000 public safety and commercial customers in more than 100 countries. We rank number 1 in the US, number 1 in the world in what we do. We have the number 1 brand, an iconic brand in public safety. And we're Fortune's 3rd most admired company in the category that we're rated. Not every company has the kind of impact on society, both real and personal, that we do. And through the products and solutions we provide to police, fire, and emergency medical teams, we're doing meaningful work in the critical moments that matter. And oftentimes our products are the difference between life and death with instant access and instant communications. I'm excited to be leading this company through this interesting and fascinating and challenging chapter. One where we'll build and grow in new ways on the strongest parts of our foundation. So as I mentioned, 10 years ago, big company, 6 different businesses. In 2004, we spun off the semiconductor business. In 2006, we sold our automotive electronics business to Continental. In 2011, we sold the cellular infrastructure business to Nokia. It was all about improving our focus and knowing where we can win and where we can't. And finally, we made, as Sam knows very well, what I call the mother of all decisions. We decided to break up the company. We decided, and more specifically, to spin off the cell phone and cable TV set-top box business, known as Motorola Mobility, which shortly thereafter was acquired by Google. That is a lot of change. And although Motorola has been known for inventing and starting these businesses, its staying power in these markets had been less than consistent. My view is that many of these businesses ran the risk of consumerization and commoditization, unlike the core business that we're focused on today. Now, let me emphasize that none of these were bad businesses, and each had different competitors, likely required different capital structures, and needed more operational and strategic focus in different owners' hands that would allow them to thrive and reach their full potential. So my first lesson with all this change and journey is know what you're good at and why. Double down on your core business and create even more value. Ironically, Motorola's core business today, Motorola Solutions, the video, is actually the original business that the company was founded on and built upon 80 years ago. And it's that very business that's led to the creation of other businesses and technologies, and that now makes up who we are today, the #1 mission-critical communications and solutions provider in the world. Its attributes are second to none, and this reinforced, dedicated focus allows us to differentiate, compete, and win, which ultimately will create more value. And that's not just my view, it's a fact. If we look at total shareholder return, or TSR as I refer to it, over the last 20 years, Motorola has been negative in TSR over 2 decades. The story is slightly improved, but not materially different for the past 15 years. That said, since the breakup of the company with the spin-off of the cell phone business in 2011, for the first 3 years we've outperformed the market, and our key operational and productivity metrics are pretty much the highest that they've ever been in the company. 5.5 years ago, a little bit more, February of '09, the entire market cap of Motorola, before the breakup, all businesses, was $8 billion. Now, it was after the financial collapse, equities were depressed, but the entire market cap of big Motorola was $8 billion. Today, Motorola Solutions, us, are about double that. Motorola Mobility, that we spun off and ultimately got acquired by Google, was acquired for $12.5 billion. And along the 4.5 years, we've returned $6 billion to shareholders. So what was $8 billion 5 years ago, we've created $34 billion 5 years later. And this is not only is it a great business in its current form, MSI, but we also see a world of opportunity to grow and evolve it in the future. So lesson number 1, know what you're good at and why, and build it and add more value. Lesson number 2 is remember Mike Tyson. Now, I remember when Mike Tyson was in his prime and he was interviewed by a sports reporter who said, "Iron Mike, every time you jump in the ring, an opponent is lined up and has a strategy to beat you." And his response was, "Yeah, I know. Everybody has a strategy to beat me until I punch them in the mouth." So I'd say in that lesson, there were two critical punches we took as a company during this journey. The first punch was the multi-year collapse of the cell phone business, and it began in pretty much 2006 and it continued to decline and deteriorate for the next 5 years. We lost billions in earnings and cash in this business during that time, and basically became irrelevant in the very space that the company had created in 1983. This was further accentuated by the introduction of the iPhone in January of '07. And then we had a second punch, which most of you shared, and that was the financial crisis. The second worst economic calamity in our nation's history after the Great Depression. The financial markets nearly failed, the credit markets seized up, and to be honest, there was a time I wasn't sure Motorola was going to survive. And that's when it was clear, and I remember Mike Tyson, that a strategy is only as good as its adaptability in real time. It's how you react to the punches received that ultimately will determine your success. Your strategy has to be pliable and malleable to the unforeseen events that will come your way, because inevitably, as they say, you know what happens, and it will. And your strategy is as much about what you don't do as it is about what you do. Third lesson during this journey, there needs to be a burning platform for change, either real or created. We didn't have to worry about creating one. We had a real one. It was Winston Churchill that said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." I've actually heard our mayor say the same thing when he was chief of staff in the White House. And in 2008, we certainly had a crisis, and we needed an immediate and clarion call to action. We suspended the dividend, froze the pension, froze salaries, suspended the 401k contribution, and the stock dropped by more than half in my first 6 months as CEO. And then the Lehman Brothers collapse hit in September. It was tough. It was a code red situation, as I like to say it. We took $3 billion out of our cost structure in '08 and '09 just to survive from a liquidity standpoint. We were a huge company, but losing a lot of money with more red ink in sight. They were tough times, and they were lonely times. But sometimes when you're in a crisis, you come out better on the other side, because you're forced to act quickly, and you seize the opportunity to do bold and dramatic things at a pace that you might not have otherwise chosen. And amidst of all this change and chaos back in '08, when I was a rookie CEO, literally weeks in the job, my phone rang, and it was Carl Icahn. Which brings me to my fourth lesson, which is when Icahn calls, answer the phone. More broadly, I would say when any activist investor calls, engage. Now, I had talked with Carl a couple of times before I became CEO, but this time it was different. I was in the chair. And although he had lost a proxy fight with the company the year before, things were different. The fact of the matter was, our cell phone business continued to deteriorate at an alarming pace, and Carl's arguments were getting more and more traction with the investor community. My honeymoon was over. Actually, it never got started. So at the end of the day, we negotiated an agreement and gave him 2 board seats that were in the form of 2 representatives from his company. At the end of the day, I decided I'd rather have Carl inside the tent positioned out than outside the tent positioned in. And please note, I've cleaned up that metaphor for general consumption. Remember, activists are typically event-driven, and that's certainly what happened with Carl and Motorola. Since we had already made the decision to spin off the cell phone business, I knew Carl was supportive of that. We were of one mind on what we both wanted. So my view was, let's stand shoulder to shoulder and have him work with management to get it done. I found Carl and his people to be constructive, determined, okay, maybe very determined, and ultimately very helpful to getting done what we needed to do, which was no easy task. And as I think back about that experience, I would say that if you can keep your ego in check and you don't mind being challenged, I found ultimately the engagement to be constructive with a very positive ending. As someone once said, if you don't care who gets the credit, there's no limit to what you can get done. We were open, transparent, and direct, and as long as management does what's in the company's best interest, then you just have to take a deep breath and channel your inner godfather, which is always reminding myself, it's not personal, it's strictly business. Actually, Carl was not the only activist we worked with. Today, Value Act, more prominently known for their engagement in Microsoft and Valiant, with one board seat is represented also. They too have helped make us better. They're exceptionally smart and well-versed on the details of our company. We turn everything over to them. We hide nothing. And I appreciate their point of view and ideas for exploring ways to look at the business differently. In fact, for 6 of my 7 years as CEO, we've had an activist investor in the form of our largest shareholder in our boardroom. Now, net, when you put all those ingredients in the blender, it's been positive. Although I will tell you, it's certainly not for the faint of heart. Now, having said that, my 5th and last lesson learned on this journey is that culture trumps strategy every time. And quite frankly, I'm still right in the middle of this one as we speak. We are, the folks from Motorola. And our journey is far from complete. Because while we've changed a lot of things and sold other businesses and units, now it's time to change the hardest part. And that's from within. Right now, us in our core business. And yes, we're number one, and we have $5 billion plus in backlog and tens of thousands of adoring customers and the best product portfolio in the world. This is the time to do it and change now, ahead of the curve proactively, controlling our own destiny and not reacting to events. We've seen how much fun that is. The journey's taught me a great deal about the importance of a culture of a company. Now, culture is kind of a fancy word, but in the end, it's 2 things. It's what a company does and how you do it. That's culture. It's what you do and how you do it. At Motorola Solutions, we do have a strong culture of customer focus and quality and pride and competitiveness where everybody wants to win. We have clarity of purpose that every employee can articulate and relate to. It's a culture of integrity and hard work and good values. And while our workforce and reach is global, our culture embodies the best of the Midwest. But over the years, habits and practices have taken hold in our culture that need to change for us to compete and be the company we really want to be, the company we really need to be. We're extremely process-oriented. To avoid risk, we have an excessive amount of people doing checking, and more checking the checkers. We've got too many fiefdoms and duplication of effort, and too often we configure things to the way we've always done it, instead of looking at whether we should do it at all. The successful Motorola Solutions of tomorrow needs to be simpler and leaner. We'll have fewer layers of management. We'll push decisions closer to the customer in the field. And our decisions will be data-driven, not opinion or tradition-driven. So now we're looking deeper, using a clean sheet of paper approach to throw out the encumbrances and vestiges of the past. From top to bottom, we're asking ourselves, why do we do this? What purpose does it serve? Are we over-engineering something to protect ourselves from what is really a very low amount of risk to begin with? Our culture needs to be one that can adapt and thrive on change. Have people that impact the news and not report it. Have energy givers and not energy takers. And have people that refuse to settle for the status quo and have the guts to ask why. So those are those 5 lessons that I've learned along the way, and as enjoyable as it's been to briefly recount them, I do have a few other final thoughts as well. First, I'm grateful I haven't been alone on this journey of 7 years. It's been a tough one and a long one, but I'm a man of faith, and it's always helpful to know that you never walk alone in tough times. Second, you have to have people around you who really know you and care about you, who know you and care about you and can tell you anything, whether you want to hear it or not. There are a few people at Motorola who fit that bill, and they know who they are. And they were with me every step of the way. But probably the most important person would be my wife, Anna. Now, we started dating when I was 16, so she definitely knows me. And I remember just during the darkest days at the beginning of my CEO tenure, when the existence of Motorola was in doubt, she was a source of strength and reminded me, hey, Brownie, this is not about you. And I particularly remember it was April or May, and I was definitely feeling the pressure. I lost 30 pounds in 45 days. I wasn't eating or sleeping. And stress to me is either comes from one of two things. You're either not prepared or you're really at a fork in the road and not sure what to do. For me, it was the latter. And the cell phone business, which was the most complex, was the only one I had not run before becoming CEO. So I'm walking around the house at 2:30 or 3 in the morning, and Anna comes out and says, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" By the way, this was a pretty normal occurrence. And I said, "I got to tell you, you have no idea. I'm just telling you, you have no idea how bad this situation is." She stood there, and I said, "There's multiple operating systems. I'm not sure the boards fully gets it. I mean, this thing is as nasty and tough as I've ever seen. You wouldn't believe it." She said, "You're right, I wouldn't. And quite frankly, I don't care." She said, "What I know is 65,000 people at Motorola are waiting for you to lead. So be the guy I know I married and lead." Now, I was just simply looking for an "I love you" or something. I didn't get that. And I didn't, by the way, I didn't get up the next morning, put on a cape, and fly to Schaumburg. That didn't work either. But it was a turning point. The other thing that comes to mind is my son, Troy, who at the time, things start to turn. And I have to find a subject matter expert that can run this cell phone business. There's not many people. They need to know silicon, software, technical depth, platforming experience. And I find the guy, Sanjay Jha, credentialed, smart, PhD out of Qualcomm, very savvy. Met with him, all set to go. Talked to the board, we're all set. And on Friday, a board member calls. I said, "I think we're a go on Sanjay. This is huge. He's just what the doctor ordered." And said, "You know, Greg, he wants to be co-CEO. He doesn't want to work for you. He wants to be co-CEO. If we're going to split this company, he wants to be co-CEO." I said, "Really?" And he said, "It's up to you. You don't want to do it, the board will support you. You do want to do it, the board will support you." I go home. Now, I've only been CEO 8 or 9 months. The last thing I'm thinking about is sharing the job. So I said to my son, Troy, who was a junior at Boston College, I said, "Troy, let me run this by you. Good kid, grounded, knows me, yada, yada, yada." And he says, "Well, let me ask you something. Do you think he's the right guy to run the business?" I said, "I think he's the perfect guy." "Would there be a risk that he'd not come if you don't do it?" I said, "Probably. I don't think it's that big, but somewhat." "Is the business better off if he comes?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Well, Dad, you always told us do the right thing and keep your ego in check, so I'd do it." That's not the answer I was looking for either. So we did it. And on Monday or Tuesday of that following week, we did it. And while the co-CEO thing worked out in the end, It was far from a typical experience, but that's the topic for another day. As CEO, the Motorola journey is giving me newfound respect for the responsibilities of the offices we hold and what we've been entrusted with on behalf of our people and customers and partners and shareholders. No matter what's happening, internally or around us, we need to be strong ambassadors for our company, as well as active civic leaders. We need to give back to the community and help foster the next generation of innovators, and participate and engage in the debate on the formulation of public policy at the national level. This journey and these experiences have reminded me that there's no substitute for resilience, resolve, energy, and courage. And through the most difficult of times, our people's commitment to innovation and continuous improvement never wavered. And that's why I'm so proud and optimistic about our future. Look, the challenge for all of us is to inspire people, win the battle for their minds, ignite the fire in their gut, unleash the passion in their souls, and solidify the conviction in their hearts, and do so while change is constant and levels of uncertainty are ever present. So I hope that what I've shared with you will be of some value in the challenges that you face. And thank you all for your time and attention, and I wish you nothing but success and good fortune in each of your individual journeys. Thanks for listening. Sure.
Thanks, Greg. You started your remarks by mentioning essentially shrinking the company. When you go back and look at that, how did you decide, first off, how did you decide to shrink the company? And how did you decide what the core business was that you were going to keep?
So I think the first few decisions were easier because in virtually all of the businesses that I mentioned, we were woefully underperforming. They took a lot of capital, they were highly volatile, and quite frankly, it was causing an issue with the employees of Motorola because people who were in businesses that were doing better were getting their bonuses dragged down by underperforming businesses. So there was little synergy, and those first few divestitures were relatively easy. As we scanned the firm, you talk about and think about where are we number one, and where can we sustainably differentiate and compete. If you think about the cell phone business, and this was a tough one, but Motorola invented the cell phone. Number one in 1995 with 50% market share. Number one. Well, what happened over the business is it went from voice, which everybody used to talk on the phone, to texting and data and video. It went from form factor to software, iOS and Android. And the basis by which we competed in the past were completely different. And as we lost share and basically became irrelevant, even though our identity of Motorola, still often people think of cell phones, that too wasn't that hard a decision. It was an emotional one, but from a business standpoint, it was not a tough one. And people and the employees understood, so they rallied behind it.
How much did Carl Icahn influence that sort of strategic direction, strategic change?
Well, I think he would like to say he influenced it a lot, and that's fine.
And you would say?
I would agree with Carl Icahn.
Yeah?
I always agree with Carl. No, all kidding aside, we had talked about it in 2007. I became CEO in the first, this is another one, in the first board meeting, 30 days in. We announced that we publicly announced and put out a press release that we were evaluating strategic alternatives. First 30 days. 60 days later, we announced we would spin the cell phone business. And then later on in April, we settled with Carl and negotiated a settlement. Look, he's a tough cookie, but I will tell you, I learned a lot from him. He's a shrewd operator. And he was helpful. He was helpful to get things done. Now, we happened to agree on what that was. So having Carl's presence, having two people on the board, I think was a net positive and made it constructive for management and the board to make sure we followed through on the commitment of the strategy that we outlined. And I still talk to him today. He's a sharp guy, tough guy.
So during that time, how often did you have dialogue with Carl? And you were mentioning to me at dinner that he was always shy about calling you at odd hours.
Yeah, I talked to him a lot, but by the way, he had no interest or suggestions, zero, on how to manage the company. Raise prices, do this, nothing, zero, nada. He would check in, and he would oftentimes ask me what I found to be the same questions, over and over. And it dawned on me, he knew what he was doing. He wanted to make sure my answers were still the same ones that I told him a month ago, and 2 months ago, and so on. He would call at odd hours. I remember we were on our way out the door. We were in this negotiation on something. And we were on our way out the door to have dinner for our anniversary. And caller ID on the landline, which, who calls on a landline? It says Carl Icahn. I think my battery was dead. And Anna, my wife, we're walking out. She looks, she says, do not answer that phone. Don't do it. I said, I got it. It'll be a short call. She said, great, will you take, there's no short call. I answered the phone. I won't tell the details because this is a bigger crowd, but it was an abbreviated call, and we ended up talking the next day to a productive end. He was fine. You can't ignore the guy. He doesn't respond well to that.
Was it difficult dealing with the pressure of Carl Icahn on the one hand and sort of the external, given the state of the company at the time that you referenced, dealing with your external pressures from whether it's customers or investors on the one hand, and then the internal pressure both in the company and then from your board?
It kind of morphed. In the beginning, I was scared to death of this guy, Carl Icahn, the omnipresent Carl. And he doesn't call once, he calls multiple times, so I was intimidated as a rookie CEO. Over time, that went away. And I didn't feel a lot of pressure from Carl. I felt pressure, but he would never be specific. He would just be omnipresent. The pressure of running the business and making these decisions and turning it, pension, costs, divestitures, were much, much harder and much more stress-filled. We tell war stories today, and we have a lot of laughs when looking back on it.
So going forward for Motorola, what's your portfolio strategy today? You're going to stay focused in this business? Do you see adjacent markets that you can go into?
So we're number one in what you would consider the walkie-talkie business, right? The radios on the policeman's belt. And we have that number one radio systems business, but it's not just the device for emergency communications. We build all the infrastructure that supports that. So think of it, if you will, as we're the Verizon or AT&T of public safety. We build all those backbone networks as well as the devices, only in our case, the networks are owned by customers. We don't own it like a carrier, T-Mobile, Sprint. We build it and we turn the ownership of that end-to-end network over to a customer. We have a great position, but as the video showed, there's adjacencies of what's beyond just voice communications. And it's the real-time crime center. It's aggregating the information that comes in for emergency response. Call taking, dispatch, social media, Twitter, data analytics, the aggregation of video. We do that in Chicago. So we do much more than just mission-critical communications, John, but the adjacencies extend itself, which is why we're hard to compete against. We don't do just the next best radio. We build an end-to-end industrial strength system. So disintermediating or trying to break that end-to-end is hard to do. And we do it not with just superior products and software, we do it with best-in-class encryption. So each one of these private secure networks in Dallas or New York or with the Secret Service or ATF or Norway are all secured and customized in feature set and software. That's why I think this business has a long runway with the best people in the world running it.
So you talked in your opening remarks about that strategy works right up until something changes and you've got to learn to adapt to that. Where do you see competition coming from? I mean, can your products, and you talked about getting rid of businesses that are consumer business, a little bit more subject to commoditization. Are you going to have competitors, lower price competitors come in, different technology competitors come in?
Well, it's a very competitive market today in the US and around the world. The Chinese are active. A corporation in Melbourne, Florida is our primary competitor here in the States. Airbus, McNerney's arch competitor, was our biggest competitor because they had a mission-critical communications arm. 2 weeks ago, they announced they were getting out of the business and selling it, which we view favorably. I think this is the kind of space, too, where customers, they really value the total cost of ownership and the quality and reliability of what you do. So yes, there's price sensitivity, but customers you're securing a community, you're putting mission-critical communications instantaneously and secure in life and death situations. Customers don't say, cut the price. It's not to say it's not price sensitive, it is, but that's why I think we have a lot of staying power in building in the end-to-end systems with intellectual property that wraps around it in a way that will return reasonable margin and allows for continued investment. We put more R&D in this space than all of our competitors combined because we know it and we see the growth in it and we're going to continue to invest in it.
I've seen a proposal for what is called FirstNet to be developed in the next couple of years. Can you tell us what that is and what impact that's likely to have on Motorola?
Sure.
And on law enforcement more generally.
So think of all these networks, Dallas, New York, Chicago, LA, these communications networks, as they're private, so they're not a cellular carrier. They're owned by our customer, and they provide instantaneous, always-on voice communications. What FirstNet's doing is been chartered by the US government in the Middle Class Jobs Relief Act to build an interoperable broadband network or networks. So there'll be two networks. There'll be these LMR, land mobile radio networks, that make up the patchwork of interoperability I described for voice. But FirstNet will lead the construction of this broadband network. Now, it's government run, so it's slower and more bureaucratic. It has slowed down much more than what we thought, but it doesn't compete or take away business from our core because it's a different network with different technology. It's more about interoperable video. It's interoperable broadband and multimedia. We, led by Bob Schassler and Mark Moon, have been building a portfolio also end-to-end to be interoperable broadband for Chicago or Dallas or New York or the state of New Jersey or whomever. And we just won an award in Los Angeles. They spent $280 million building an interoperable, modernized communications network, and they awarded us a second award of $175 million to build an interoperable multimedia network. Infrastructure, software, control points, and devices. Those two networks, when completely built, will be separate, but then we'll lash them together and pass information between the two and aggregate it in a command center so that LAPD or Police Chief Charlie Beck in Los Angeles can have his people take all the information from both networks. Now, it's taken a while. FirstNet, we're working more closely with. I think the relationship has improved significantly, but it's typically not the way public safety is procured. Now, very important, years and years and years ago, public safety networks had trouble interoperating. You'll hear about interoperability. But the reason for that was they were on different pieces of spectrum or frequency, and there was no common standard. In FirstNet or in broadband, there is common spectrum in 700 megahertz, and there's an interoperable standard called LTE. So 90 or 95% of the interoperability challenges for public safety that have been historic several decades ago have been solved for. We'll continue to work with them. We're also building public safety LTE networks in a Middle East country that prioritizes security that I can't name. And we're also working with some other tenders right now in the Middle East and other parts of the world in Latin America.
So when that gets rolled out, what kind of impact will that have on law enforcement?
I think a law enforcement first responder will be able to have virtually any information that he or she needs at the point of situational awareness, much more beyond just push-to-talk voice. They'll have a converged device that can really feed them anything they need. And with the provisioning of video, a first responder that's 2 miles away, he or she can get on a video the download of the situation before they're even arriving there, so they see what they're seeing. Is there 3 bad guys? Is there gang members? What's the scene before they even get there? And call for support and do much more robust law enforcement in ways with technology tools they don't have available today. It's very exciting.
So switching topics, you talked about leadership in your talk. A couple of questions there. I'm told that when speaking with employees that you prefer webcasts to the telephone. Is that right?
Yeah.
So tell me which is funny for someone who makes walkie-talkies for a living there.
Mission critical walkie-talkies.
Mission critical walkie-talkies.
My talks are not that critical. That's a joke, by the way. No, we webcasted.
What do you get from the virtual face-to-face communication that you don't get from voice communication?
Look, you can communicate anywhere. I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram, and we can do a lot of stuff. But I think there's no substitute for face-to-face communication. I like town halls. I like them unscripted. There's no slides. We get into a room. I make some remarks about the state of the business, competition, FirstNet, competitors, the pension, morale, whatever it is, and then we just mix it up. And I think people like the give and take, and when you webcast it, because there's a physical limitation to how many people are in the room, everybody can participate. I'm making a renewed round, literally traveling around the world. We just did one in Mexico City, Columbia, Maryland, Schaumburg on Friday, Basingstoke, Krakow. I like face-to-face. I like where people can ask anything and feel anything. It just gives me a pulse and a feel that the internet and the web don't give me. So I like to be able to press the flesh and see what people are thinking and feeling, unscripted.
So you also talked in your talk about the importance of eliminating ego and animosity from corporate decision-making. How do you track the emergence of those traits in your management team? And is this a response to lessons that you learned earlier in your career?
Well, for sure, and I talked about my wife, but she literally often says, it's not about you. And the way I track it is the team I build. So I ask, and really look around the table and say, do these people come in and tell me what they think? Or do they bullshit me? Will they tell me what is really on their mind? Do they say, I disagree? I don't think you've thought it through. And I think for the most part, I know they do, because they do. And at home, I'm always grounded. I have no choice but to be grounded. That's also a joke. But I think that, I just think you have people that have the common values that want to put the company first, and they want us all to collectively succeed as a team. That sounds like motherhood and apple pie. But, and by the way, the majority of the folks that work for me now are new in their role. We have probably 40% of the vice presidents at Motorola are new in their role. It takes time, and it's hard. But there's no substitute for candor and exchange, and it's really the power of idea, not the number of stripes on your sleeve. You never can track it because, look, people, they still don't want to give me bad news. They want to make me happy and please me. They want me to remember them. So I know the closer you get to the corner office, the more ambiguous information gets. I have to do skip level, double skip level. I text, I call, I check people in the field. I'm not checking on my team, but I want to know what's going on from the guy in Latin America. I want to know from the country manager in Mexico. I want to know. So what's going on? And they shouldn't feel, and I don't think they do feel, threatened or encumbered. And if they do, they're the wrong team, because there has to be kind of a horizontal flattening structure of the way you run the company.
Switching topics, you're chair of the Business Roundtable's Immigration Committee. After midterm elections this year, do we see any possibility of real immigration reform?
Well, this one, I'm really proud to spend the time on this one. It's been rewarding and really, really frustrating. I was talking to John Rowe and Sam Scott, who run IBIC. My personal opinion, so we had comprehensive reform in the Senate, by a vote of 68 to 32. And I've talked to everybody on both sides of the aisle, the president, the administration, the speaker, everyone. My belief, on the record and off, is absolutely positively there's unanimous support to get meaningful immigration reform done. What's holding it back is politics and who gets the credit and what issue it's going to be used in what campaign. There was a threading of the needle. I thought that as the Republicans were stacking up wins in the Republican primary, Paul Ryan and Mario Diaz-Balart had worked for a year, almost a year, on a piece of legislation that I think was outstanding and had a lot of recognition on both sides of the aisle and awareness. And the threat by the Republicans was they were worried that they would be chastised or be at risk in their primaries with the Tea Party. But one after one, Republicans won their primary. And then Eric Cantor lost. My personal opinion is that had Cantor won and the Central American kids didn't come over the border the way they did at the speed that they did, there was about a 4 to 6 week window where I think legislation would have been advanced. Cantor loses, it chills the Republican Party. Now there's a constant and continual and new debate on securing the border, regardless of whether you want immigration or not. Secure the border, secure the border, secure the border. It has to happen after the midterms, sometime in 2015, in one form or another. I think there'll be an allergic reaction to comprehensive reform. There will probably be smaller pieces of individual legislation on border, e-verify, high-tech, guest worker. But if it's not done, I think the Republicans have no chance of winning the White House, and I think they know that. So the pure politics will take over, hopefully after January 1. And Obama wants it as a legacy item in his second term to enjoin Obamacare, and the Republicans want it because they know they need to be transformational and closer to the White House for a 16 run.
So moving more locally, earlier this year you identified 3 critical challenges facing the Chicago area: our fiscal problems, education crisis, as well as immigration reform. What specific advice on these challenges would you offer to the winner of next year's mayoral election here? And will you start out by saying Mr. Mayor or Madam Mayor?
Well, time will tell on that. But whether you're local or state, and JB and I were just talking politics up on the dais a little bit, and I don't really care what party you're for. We need leadership, and we need people who, and again, we all talk about it, we just never do it. You need people to compromise. You need people to find common ground. It's not going to be a win or a lose. But the thing I think that's often, there's so much demagoguing, demonization, and misinformation in the ads and in the sound bites and on cable TV. I think you need leaders to call it as you see it. But at the same time, somehow appeal to people. People, regardless of the issue at the end of the day, I think judge a candidate in part by their likability, but more importantly by his or her leadership. Can I trust them, and do I believe they will lead? I may not agree with them. I probably won't in everything. And that's what we need. We'll see. I mean, Illinois is in much more dire straits than I think people realize. Yes, there's been some work done on the pension, but you can't spend money you don't have. And Washington has that problem exponentially as well. It takes too long, but that's no silver bullet, John. It's just leadership, and it's hard.
Right, so and you just referenced the problems in Illinois, kind of given what we've got, is there a tipping point that CEOs look at or should look for in terms of when things get, we've had companies talk about moving out of the state. We've had a couple of companies who moved out, but others who've talked about moving out. Is Is there a point in time where the thing really tips over and people say we've got to get out?
I don't know if there's a deadline per se, but I know, look, all of my colleagues look at it, and that's another thing that gets me going on these tax inversions. I think the audacity of the federal politicians to stand up and accuse a CEO of being unpatriotic when they've sat on their you-know-whats for 5 years and haven't overhauled corporate tax reform. And I've been in countless meetings with people, Treasury secretaries and others. Oh, those are good points. We talked about this years ago, and people laid out, these mergers will happen, these inversions will occur. This is no something, pick up the Tribune and it just happened. And then all of a sudden, big business is bad. I think it's such a hypocrisy. I thought Miles White's editorial said it best. I don't think there's a deadline. I just think at some point, you got to get on with getting on. This company you spun off, Motorola Mobility, just opened an office downtown to attract more city-based employees, presumably getting access to more varied engineering talent. Given things like that, what are the long-term prospects for the kind of the corporate suburban campus here? So I love our Chicago presence. Jack Malloy runs North America. We've put a few hundred people here on 224 South Michigan. There's no doubt it has a vibrancy. It's accessible to Northwestern and other key universities. You just attract Paul Steinberg's, our CTO's technical talent, marketing people that work for Eduardo. There's just the young talent likes working in the city. They're generally less inclined to come out into the burbs. I think the city has so many positive attributes, and we got to build on it, and we will. We'll put more people down here, but I can't think of a more vibrant cultural and environment for us to put capital, human and otherwise, down in Chicago. And I remain optimistic about it. Yes, the challenges in front are difficult, but I think collectively we'll get through them.
So a couple of final questions. What kind of phone do you carry now? Do you still carry a Razr?
No. Samsung Galaxy. I've always used Android. I've never used an Apple phone. I just like Android. I'm used to it. I like it. It's familiar. It's easy. That's what I use.
Tablet?
Just a MacBook Air, no tablet. And unfortunately, I don't have the Note, the Samsung Galaxy Note, although some of my colleagues do. But I do the majority of my email on my phone, which is not good. But I do. And when I have the laptop, the MacBook Air, I'll use that. But I don't use an iPad. It's one or the other.
Okay, you mentioned JB. So here's a chance for you to put
here we go.
someone else in the hot seat. Well, in 2 weeks, we've got Secretary Clinton for a special dinner meeting in 2 weeks. So what should our moderator for the program, JB Pritzker, what should he ask Hillary?
I think that's a good question. I think that I had two ideas I have two ideas. One is if she chooses not to run, I'd like to ask her what would be the factors, not whether she's running or not, but if she chooses not to run, what would be the potential factors that would lead her not to do that? And secondly, from a foreign policy standpoint, after being Secretary of State working for the President, to delineate and articulate a little bit more specifically where she agreed and where she disagreed in foreign policy. Ukraine, Russia, Libya, what specific policies was there a demarc point and a divergence? I think that's important to understand. So there's a differentiation to understand the difference between the President and the Secretary of State. But that'll be a great turnout, and kudos to you and JB for getting her.
Okay, JB, your job just got easier. Greg, thanks very much. Appreciate your taking the time and being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.